Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, welcome back to Should You Buy It? In this video series, I like to go over random or niche gear and I just talk about where it's useful, if it's even useful at all, and if you should buy it. This episode is going to mark the 5th one in the series, and it's actually the 3rd one in a row that I made for the channel. Just want to say that next week I want to do a little bit bigger of a video. I'm going to make a boss guide. I'm not sure which one I'm going to do yet, but I know you're going to tune in and find out next week because you're subscribed to the channel. You guys do seem pretty receptive of this series, and I just want to say thank you because the big YouTube numbers make me feel happy. On today's episode, we're going to talk about Bloodbark armor and Swampbark armor. They were both introduced at the start of the year. You know, people were pretty interested in them when they first came out or prior to their release, myself included. Their set bonuses seem pretty good. They strengthened some of the spells that were already in the game. But ever since they were released, it seems like they've kind of fallen off the radar. People don't really talk about them too much. And I had a hard time trying to do some research to figure out where the stuff is useful, or if it is at all. We did come up with some stuff though, so I think it's time to start talking about it. So Swampbark and Bloodbark both had their own different magic and defense requirements to wear. A lot of people like to compare them to Mystics because they're very similar in magic offensive capabilities. But a full Mystic set is actually going to have a tiny bit more magic offense over the Bark armor. The real difference that comes into play is obviously the set bonuses, but also the Bark armor has a lot more defense. So basically this armor falls between Mystics and the next stuff up like Arums or Infinity Gear, you know? That's kind of where they rest. I also think it's worth mentioning that if you're comparing Swampbark to Bloodbark, not by the set bonus, only by the stats on the gear, then Bloodbark is strictly better. Of course the set bonuses are what people are more interested in than just the raw stats on the items, so let's start talking about it. So the absolute first thing you're going to notice is that you look bougie as hell in this gear. This is some fancy Class A RuneScape fashionscape for both sets of armor. Anyway, so the set bonus for Swampbark armor is that for every piece you have on, you increase the duration of your bind spells by 1 tick. So with the full set, it's going to be an extra 3 seconds per bind you put on someone or something. I mean, really when you're talking about this armor, you have to think about where the spell is going to be useful, not just the armor. Because if the spell isn't useful, then the armor set bonus is just, there's no point to it, you know? And when you're thinking about PvE, there's basically nowhere Entangle is going to be helpful. You know, there's almost no situations you're going to find yourself needing to use it over something else. It's as simple as there just being a better tool for the job. However, in situations where you're PKing, this might actually be useful. If you have the whole set on when you entangle someone, it's going to be just 1 second shorter than if you were ice barraging them, which is a much higher level spell. I do need to acknowledge that I'm not a PvPer. You know, I don't go into the wilderness, I don't PK, I don't do any of that. I watched a lot of videos of content creators that actually do PK and have the knowledge for this sort of stuff. It seemed like the general consensus was that it was not half bad, but most people wouldn't take the full set, they would only take maybe a piece or two. As I said in the beginning, this stuff is kind of comparable to Mystics, which people would take as like a budget cheap pick for PvP. This gear is basically going to fall between risking and not risking. It's a budget risk, basically. I guess that's the best way to put it. This also applies to Bloodbark, though. It's not exclusive to the Swampbark. Of course, if you can think of anywhere to use either of these sets of armor, let me know down below, because I like to have all this information in one place. You know, I like to put all the stuff into the pinned comment down below that I might have forgotten to talk about or didn't know about. A little community effort, you know, we can all help each other figure out where we can actually use this stuff. Next up, we have Bloodbark armor. I think the best comparison to make between these armor sets is the Mario to Luigi dynamic. You know, the green one's a little more goofy, a little bit less desirable than the red one. Although the red one isn't that much better, they're basically the same thing, just people look at the red one and think it's better than green. So with the Bloodbark set, you get an extra 1.5% healing whenever you cast a blood spell, per piece. When it comes to PvE, I still kind of struggled thinking where this might be useful or where you could see some extra use out of this over other armor. This probably applies more for Iron Men, but using it at the last boss for Song of the Elves is actually not half bad since you take a lot of damage and you need to use straight magic. I mean, there's going to be better options if you're a higher level, if you can just buy stuff off the Grand Exchange, but if you took the time to grind this stuff out and you didn't have those higher level options, then this is almost going to be your best bet, basically. You know, again, that's going to be super niche, it's not something that everyone's going to do. It's just an area, it's a possibility for it, you know? I also thought about maybe using this stuff at God Wars dungeon, because I know a pretty popular way to heal yourself when you're killing one of the bosses is to blood barrage the minions after the boss is dead. I feel like whenever I do that, I generally get enough health back without using the Bloodbark armor, but for someone that's maybe struggling more, or they just need that extra health because their defense is kind of low, this might be an option. I mean, to be completely honest, most of the time when you blood barrage, you're already going to get enough health back when you're using it. You don't need an extra 1.5% per piece. It's not worth taking over stronger armor in my opinion. So this next bit is actually also going to apply to Swampbark, but I just wanted to talk about it with the Bloodbark because the defensive stats are better on it over Swampbark. But as it turns out, the gloves and the boots are both better than Mystic pieces. They have more magic offense and they have more defense. There's a very small gap for this to be useful during your account as you're leveling through those mid-levels, but it's there. You know, it's a spot where it's going to be better. And of course, the defensive bonuses also carry over into PvP, so this set can also be used in PK, you know, there's a spot there for it. Again, I'm not super familiar with it. I watched some videos with content creators that do specialize in this sort of stuff. Seemed like they were doing it for fun, just trying to test it out, you know, get some content out of it. It doesn't seem like it's meta or anything like that. Really it just comes down to what kind of build you have with your account and how much you want to risk when you PK. Alright, but what have we learned here? You know, what have we actually come across when we're talking about this stuff? It really seems like PKing is the best spot for this stuff to be used at. You know, you gotta think about where the spells are actually useful. Where are you gonna use Blood Barrage? Where are you gonna use Entangle? There's not a lot of areas in the game to do that when you're not killing somebody. And when you're in those situations where you would want to PvE with these spells, there's just better options for gear. The set bonus just isn't enough to make up for the lack of stats on them. Although, if you're in that sweet spot in the middle levels, then the gauntlets and the boots are actually strict stat upgrades over Mystic gear. So in my opinion, I just don't think it's worth buying. I just don't think it's worth the cost. The places where you can use it are mostly PvP, and that's just not how I personally play. You know, I don't even keep it in the bank. It looks cool, but I just can't see myself actually using it somewhere. Of course, that's just my opinion. You know, everyone has one, everyone's entitled to it. So let me know down below if you can think of anywhere else to use this stuff or where you personally have and you found it kind of beneficial. That is pretty much going to wrap up this episode though, guys. As always, let me know of any items you'd like to see on the series. I do have a whole list of them that I plan to get through eventually. Like I said earlier, I will have a boss guide out next week. And yeah, I just hope you guys have a wonderful ass day, and I'll see you next week for the next episode of whatever I'm bringing to you. Ahaha.